Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining today's live stream on digital transformation. And this is a transformation or digital transformation live stream that we host every Tuesday at the same time and same place on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So thanks for being here today. Today's topic is finance transformation versus digital transformation, a CFO's perspective. So we're going to go deep into not just digital transformation in general, but more specifically finance transformations. And I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through the world with their digital transformation journeys. And we're also encouraging any questions that you might have along the way. So as I get into introducing our guest here, if you have any questions about finance transformation, I encourage you to please chime in with questions or comments. We'd love to have you part of the conversation here today. And actually, this live stream is part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast that we release every Wednesday, which you can find on Google, Amazon, Spotify, Apple, etc. All the audio podcast platforms. You could also find it streaming every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter as well. So this interview is actually going to become part of that podcast episode that comes out a week from tomorrow. So we'll look forward to releasing that when that comes out. And so you're part of the live production. So thank you for being here as part of that live production here today. And then one last thing, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. I'd love to hear what city and country you're joining from. So we typically have a global audience here. So any comments you can provide where you are, what part of the world you're in, that's very helpful. So we appreciate seeing that in the chat as well. So with me today to discuss this topic of finance transformation versus digital transformation, a CFO's perspective, is a CFO, a career CFO, Chris King, who's the founder of a company called Transformative CFO. Chris, thanks for being here today.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for everybody joining us from all over the place. For me, it's early morning. Hopefully, I'm awake enough. I know for some of you, it's evening. So,
yeah, Chris is. I was telling Chris before we went live here that he's the first guest that I've had on this live stream that's on the U.S. Pacific time zone, which makes it very early for him. So thank you for being here. You have the distinct pleasure of being the earliest morning person and guest on this live stream.
All right, glad to do it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And tell us a little bit about your background. I mentioned that you're a CFO. You're the founder of Transformative CFO. Maybe tell us about your background and what Transformative CFO does.
Yeah, thank you. There's kind of three areas from my career, I think, where finance transformation has evolved for me. I started really most of my career I've spent as a CFO or other senior finance executive, where I've gone in and inherited teams that I sometimes felt were not everything they could be, and I felt could operate at a higher level, and I led them through a transformation to just really get to where they were doing their best work. In my most recent finance executive role, I had the luxury really of being a VP finance transformation, where I could really focus on that. It was a large organization with a finance team that was spread between the US, Europe, and Asia. And it was a multi-year effort to really focus on that. And in that role, I really felt like I was coming up with a strategy for finance transformation, coming up with principles for a finance transformation, and doing something that I felt was repeatable. It was very successful there. And when I left there, I started just writing about it at transformativecfo.com as kind of a blog site. As I was thinking through the idea of kind of going in and becoming a consultant. And I've now done that and created Transformative CFO LLC and starting to serve clients. And just really, I'm interested in just sharing this stuff as I'm doing with you today, because I feel like it's really something that can impact company performance by impacting finance organization performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it's probably worth noting that's how you and I met, was when you were in that VP of finance role. You were a client of Third Stages, and that's how you and I got to know each other. And exactly. now you're a consultant as well, focusing on the finance transformation sides of things. So you've had, just to clarify a bit about your background, you've had roles that are focused on finance transformation, like the VP of finance role you just described, but you've also sort of been in that frontline finance CFO or other types of roles as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. I've been a CFO of both publicly traded companies as well as startups. I've been global controller, I guess, was chief accounting officer for a New York Stock Exchange company. So I've really seen kind of that heavy SOX environment, that more innovative startup environment, and a lot of stuff in between.
Great. Great. Well, good. Well, good to have you here. Before I jump into the initial questions I have, and again, any questions from the audience, we'd love to hear questions you might have for Chris and I as we go here. But just want to turn to the audience here. Thank you for those that chimed in on where you're from. We have people joining from Denver, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Orange County, California. So you're not the only person from California that's up bright and early here today, Chris. Maybe they can commiserate with you. Austin, Texas, Hereford, UK are just a few examples of where people are joining from today. So thank you for chiming in on where you're joining from today. So I guess just to start the conversation and just to start to unpack this a bit, Chris, what are the major differences between finance transformation and digital transformation? To me, they sound somewhat similar. In many ways, they are similar. But how would you describe the similarities or differences between those two terms?
Yeah, I mean, probably you have to first acknowledge the fact that both digital transformation and finance transformation mean different things to different people, and they're big buzzwords that are out there quite a bit. I think in your practice, you've done a really good job of emphasizing digital transformation as being about more than just technology and focusing on people and process and change management. And that's one distinguishment, because I think you could look at, some people would call finance transformation simply a digital transformation of finance. Some people think of digital transformation of taking products and services and making them digital for the first time. Others would say, it's about implementing technology that changes your operations, or both. So finance transformation, I like to think of as really covering people, process, technology, data, and information to really make the whole finance organization better. I would suggest that really adding technology is something best done towards the end of a finance transformation, when you've done some of the other work.
Right. And yeah, that's a great point. So it's more of an enabler of doing some of that other work. When you think about finance transformations and some of that other work, some of that pre-technology work that you're talking about, what are some of the business benefits that organizations oftentimes realize from finance transformations? And then we can kind of come back to, what are some of those pre-technology things that we should focus on to enable the improvement? But what are the general benefits and, business areas of improvement that you've seen to be sort of the low-hanging fruit, the biggest areas of value within finance transformations?
So let me address that a couple different ways. Maybe the first thing I'd say is, when you sort of define that finance transformation, is when have I transformed, right? If I'm doing a finance transformation, when have I actually transformed my finance organization? And I'd say at that point, when each team within finance has a clear idea of what better means, and they're able to measure it. So they've got some metrics that measure whether or not they're getting better. And then they have some initiatives that are designed to act on those measures, right? You now have an organization that really is focused on, how do we improve? So then you get down to kind of what does better mean? And I think one way to get everybody with the right clarity for sort of long-term objectives is to think about, if we were to say we were better than another finance department, or better than we were last year, what would better mean? How would you measure that? And my sort of 5 items that I come up with there and think about is that you would either say that we have more timely information, so we do our month-end close faster. Maybe we have more insightful analysis, so we can impact the business and its strategy a little bit better. We're more accurate. There's fewer errors happening. We're more efficient. Just the operations are more efficient. We have less people than we used to, or we have more time spent on transformation activities than we used to with the same number of people, which is what I experienced. I'll talk about that. Or it's more reliable. We have kind of better controls or less risk or something. But really, you'd have to kind of be on one of those measures. And so I think those are good ways to anchor your kind of longer term objectives, and then figure out what's most important. So those are kind of benefits generally. I think you could improve on any one of those 5. To be more specific, in my last role, we saw a 40% improvement in operational efficiency. So people went from spending all of their time doing their day-to-day job and getting their tasks done, to spending about 40% of their time on finance transformation initiatives and just things to improve it and move those metrics forward. We reduced overdue accounts receivable by transforming that group by over 50%. We reduced the month-end close from 7 or 8 days down to 4. So that gets into that more timely information. How quickly am I helping people to steer the ship? On the FP&A side, we implemented driver-based forecasting and changed the way we were sharing information with BI, right? And really drove a significant improvement in the performance of the company. So I think all those types of benefits, and kind of whatever's most important, you're really creating this mechanism where whatever is most important to improve, we have a good structure and mechanism for improving it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it seems like compared to other functional areas within organizations, finance is one of the areas where you have the most immediate, tangible value that could be achieved, not just on the efficiency side, which you mentioned, but also some of the other things you mentioned, like improving your AR and accounts payable and things of that nature, or maybe not accounts payable so much, but more AR.
Yeah.
And so that has immediate cash tangible value that organizations can point
Absolutely.
to.
AR is just, this amount of capital that's sitting there not really doing anything. And we completed this effort and then brought in $20 million that had just always been kind of wrapped up in AR. We decreased that. About half of that came from overdue and half of it actually came from the current, and just collecting that even faster. And that's $20 million you can reinvest in new product lines and acquisitions and other areas of the business, right? And start really getting a good return on that.
Yeah, it's not a small number for sure. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because there's the intangible strategic value, of course, as well. But what about you mentioned that technology is an enabler, and there's a lot of other stuff that you would typically do before putting technology in place to get some of these improvements that you talked about. If you had to just sort of estimate, what percentage of the value that you typically see in a finance transformation comes from technology versus all the other stuff, operating model, the way you organize, your future state business processes, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think every organization, unless you really have done it, unless you're really a lean organization or have that type of process optimization going on, there's probably a lot more opportunity to improve your outcomes through process improvement, and through developing your people, than there is just new technology. And there's a temptation as a CFO to want to just write a check to somebody and just improve things. I'm not happy with what things are. Who can I pay, right? What technology system integrator? Who's going to make my organization better? And it's really kind of a I've really seen no evidence that works. Like the reality is, if you want to make your organization better, you have to lead it. You have to develop your people and do the process work. We spent a lot of time on just kind of introducing lean and doing process improvement workshops. And we really took every process within finance, and we'd do a couple-hour workshop where we'd map that out and we'd identify all the opportunities for improvement. And once you've done that, you've created this mechanism where implementing technology is going to be much more successful, because I know exactly how my process works, what the outcomes are that I'm getting from it, and whether or not I'm happy with them, and what those roadblocks are. And if I can then identify what's really wrong with my existing technology at kind of a root cause, then I know exactly what I want the new technology to do that the old one couldn't. But I think it's more often that people are struggling with other problems. It's not so much the capability of the technology that they have that's the problem. It's the way they've configured it, the way they've implemented it, or it's bad data, or it's just the way it's being used. A lot of times, I mean, the reality is, I'm sure you've seen this, where the way that people have learned to use a system is not the most efficient way to do it. It's not the way maybe that the implementer intended them to do it. Or, I would do these process improvement workshops where I'd bring in somebody from the IT side and the finance system side while we were mapping through the thing, and they would hear how people were using it and what a struggle it was and how inefficient the old system was. And they kind of say, why are you doing it that way?
Right.
But,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you were dealing, your most recent role before you started Transformative CFO, the role where you and I met, you were involved in a multinational finance group too. And that I imagine adds another layer of complexity and opportunity too, because there's a lot of inefficiencies in terms of redundant processes and redundant functions and things of that nature.
Right.
Maybe talk a little bit about that. What should a multinational finance group and organization be thinking about that's a little bit different than a single location one?
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas that we really focused on was just the harmonization of those processes. So we would do the same process improvement or process mapping workshop in both the U.S. and the U.K., and then we'd take the process maps and kind of line them up and compare them. And we had this kind of open house for a while where we'd take all the process maps from the U.S. and we'd put them on one layer in a conference room, and all of them from the U.K. that matched up to it just below it. And we did the same thing in the UK, and then invited people to go in and kind of look at it and come up with ideas they had for improving it. But our goal there was to identify those differences and kind of determine, is there a good reason why we have differences? In some cases, those two organizations have different stakeholders that have different requirements, or the businesses are a little different, and therefore, there's a good reason for it. In other cases, and much more frequently, it's just two different people thought of the right way to do something long ago, and they've been doing it that way ever since, and it's different. But because it's different, you get away from the ability to sort of standardize it and optimize it and get consistent results in both places. You get a team that doesn't understand how the other team's doing it because they're doing it differently. It's much easier to collaborate with your colleagues across the Atlantic if you guys are both doing a similar process in a similar way. And then if they're one of those ways is probably more efficient than the other. And if you really get everybody open to learning from each other and really searching for best practices instead of defending the way they do it, then you really, start to get people kind of questioning, gee, man, I really like the way they're doing that. Why don't we do that? And we saw a lot of that. And ultimately, we harmonized processes at least. And in many cases, we harmonized groups and created a global group with a single global leader out of it. Even though what we started with was really a US CFO, an international CFO, India CFO, and separate organizations within each.
Yeah, I imagine that was a cultural shift as well. You maybe talk a little bit about the cultural impact that, some of those major sorts of changes like that might have.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you're creating a certain amount of disruption and uncertainty, which is something you have to pay attention to, I think, with your people. But the more you start getting everybody the same clarity and alignment that you need to have a successful finance transformation, you really start kind of creating one team out of it, even though there's multiple leaders. And you start saying, hey, we're trying to do these 5 things, right? We're trying to make things more timely, more accurate, and more insightful. And you get everybody aligned with this overall objectives, and then they break that down for their individual process groups objectives.
Right. Yeah, makes total sense. Here's a question I want to take from the audience here. Kyler on LinkedIn, and Kyler, by the way, is our podcast co-host. And she asked the question of, what are some key indicators that an organization needs to evaluate for process effectiveness? So in other words, like in this example, you were just talking about the multinational finance transformation that you were leading. How did you know, or how did you measure that this process is broken and we need to focus on fixing it?
Yeah. What's interesting about that is where we started was we went up a level from the process to just the process group. And we said, let's organize the finance team according to these groups of processes. So groups like accounts payable or the purchase to pay process stream, right? All the people that support that are in the accounts payable process group, or collections or cash applications or general ledger accounting, et cetera. We organized by process group. And then the first thing we did was really try to get clarity among that group, getting them in the room of what is it the company needs you to do? Like, why does this group exist? What's your primary purpose and objective? So if you're talking about cash applications, right, the company needs us to apply the cash we get from our customers as quickly as possible, so the collections team isn't calling our customers about payments they've already made. And just getting sort of that clarity then says, well, what would it mean to get better? Well, we would get better at cash applications if we had fewer days from the day we'd received it to the day that it got applied, or we had less unapplied cash. And so you start getting those kind of metrics out of it as your kind of key indicators that you're going to improve. And then you start organizing yourselves around. So you've done your process improvement workshops, you've come up with some ideas for how you might make it better, but you start focusing on those of, well, what's going to most impact my number of days to apply my cash or my amount of unapplied cash. And then you get into some of the other kind of lean tools, like doing a root cause analysis of when we're not able to apply cash for a week, what is often the cause, and how do we fix that? How do we address some of those issues?
Right. So you're sort of doing that in parallel. You're measuring and analyzing and improving. You're sort of doing that in parallel as part of the initial analysis, but also as part of the improvements themselves.
Yeah, when you do that workshop, you come up with what I've kind of called, and I think it's a common lean term, IPOs, which stands for improvements, problems, and opportunities, which means I don't necessarily know how to solve it, but I found a problem I want to go act on. And so we would map these things out initially on a whiteboard with just sticky notes of step one, step two, step three. And then we'd have a different color where somebody could say, hey, I see an IPO. I see something I think we can improve, right? I don't know what the problem is here, but I know it's not efficient. I've been doing it for a long time. And what really surprises you when you do this is how much the people who are responsible for the task understand how to make it better. But there's things in the organization that are actually preventing them from just making those improvements themselves. Get a number of obstacles in the way there.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think a lot of times people overlook their own internal resources, and the people on the front lines that are actually doing this stuff. A lot of times they have the answer, or they can come up with the answer. You don't necessarily need a super smart consultant or a super fancy technology to solve the problem for you. A lot of times it's a matter of facilitating and getting that knowledge out of the people that actually know how to do that stuff.
Yeah, and what I say is the most important thing to do when you start a finance transformation is to create an environment where positive change is easy. Most organizations don't start with that. They really don't. There's a number of obstacles that keep somebody who has an idea how to improve their own process from doing it. One of those obstacles is they can't see upstream or downstream. So the visibility that the person doing the work has can be limited as to what happens downstream. So with lean, they talk to you about the voice of the customer and really understanding what happens downstream, right? And then proactively going upstream and saying, hey, do you know you're causing me some problems with the thing that you're doing? But most organizations end up, fairly siloed there. And so if you can't tell what will happen if I push this domino and knock it over, right? And what other dominoes is going to hit and what impact is that going to have somebody else? Then you need help from somebody above you. But what usually happens is you go to your manager and you say, hey, I'm thinking about making this change. I think you could make it better. Just wanted to check with you if you knew of anybody that might upset, right? And a lot of times the manager will say, you know what, just this really isn't my priority right now. Why don't you just keep doing it the way you've been doing it? And if you ask that question and get that answer a few times, you kind of stop asking the question altogether, right?
Right.
And then there's just a lack of those resources, where really what we're trying to achieve in a finance transformation is that we've created an environment where leaders are saying, how can I help you achieve your result? I know that you're trying to improve these metrics. I know you have some initiatives to do it. And when you have an obstacle you can't remove on your own, that is my role as your leader. I'm going to remove that obstacle for you. So come to me for it. That's a very different environment than most people find themselves working in if you're in one of these functions in finance.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. And then Grant from LinkedIn makes a comment that's sometimes more exciting than the other type of IPO we've heard of. So he seems like he prefers your type of IPO rather than the initial public offering, going public sort of IPO.
Right. That one makes some people rich. This makes us all a little richer.
It's well said. I want to come back in a second. I want to come back to some of the enablers of finance transformation, including technology, but not limited to technology. And we're also, by the way, we're going to get to a question here I have in a moment about your 10 principles of finance transformations. I want to ask you a question about that because you've developed sort of I don't know if it's your top 10 list, but it's your 10 principles for finance transformations. And I want to come back to that in a minute. But before we do that, I want to answer or ask this question about technology. And this is from Ryan over on LinkedIn. And he said, what role do emerging technologies like big data, blockchain, and artificial intelligence play in driving financial change and innovation? Now, I know you said technology is just an enabler. There's a lot of other stuff that you should do first before you start putting technology in place. But when you think about big data, blockchain, AI, et cetera, there's competencies that might enable more improvement that you might not otherwise get if you didn't have those technologies. So how did you see the role of emerging technology fit into your transformation, or were your improvements so fundamentally the improvements you wanted to make were so fundamental that you didn't really need to even think about AI and emerging technologies like that, or how do you find that right balance, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, that's I think it's a great question. I think that one of the things we did that I think was pretty effective was we really encouraged people to think about the art of the possible and go out and kind of educate themselves. You've been doing this role for a long time. You're running the accounts payable group or whatever. Go out and spend a little time understanding what technologies are available, what other companies are doing in accounts payable, what solutions are out there, right, and what they bring, so that you have that perspective of just how it might help you. I think some of these terms, blockchain and AI, are sexy, interesting terms. I think, how could that help me? The reality is most companies have so much just fundamental work to do
Yeah.
to get to where they're making best use of their existing technology, and they've optimized their processes, that they really don't need to add that stuff to see a lot of improvement. However, once you've really identified exactly, like you feel like, okay, I've optimized my use of existing technology the best I can. And I'm including, I've optimized my process and I fixed the problems with my existing technology and I've trained my team and they know how to use it well. And now I'm trying to get something extra out of my metrics, right? I understand what's most important for me to improve, what the company needs my team to do better. I'm trying to do it even better. I think there would be some ROI if I brought in some of these state-of-the-art technologies and was able to make use of them to help me do my process. And we did have, Blackline uses AI technology. They're a kind of month-end close and reconciliation software solution and provider. And so, we had systems like that were bringing those latest things in. We did a lot, and I'll talk in a minute when we talk about the principles, maybe about around data and data improvement. But we didn't have to really tap into big data to get where we needed improvement from. It was just structuring the company's data that
Right.
was critical there. But
yeah, it seems like a lot of organizations that we work with too have, on one hand, you have sort of just the fundamental improvements that you talked about. Let's just get more efficient. Let's just stop doing the same thing a million different ways and do things, in a consistent way. And there's so much value right there that organizations can realize just from doing real basic blocking and tackling. So you've got organizations that have real basic fundamental improvement opportunities, and then you've got technology way over here. It's way ahead of where most organizations are. In fact, I would argue the technology is changing exponentially faster than organizations are changing. And that chasm between where we are today and where technology could take us is so great that a lot of times organizations they stumble and fall into a bunch of pitfalls along the way, or they try to overreach on, hey, let's bring in AI and big data and all this stuff, when we haven't really even figured out the basic fundamental stuff. Like, let's just be more efficient. Let's just be more profitable and consistent and all that good stuff. So is that something you've seen as well?
yeah, I think it really just comes down to getting to the point where you know exactly what problem you're trying to solve and why
Yeah.
your existing technology is a limiting factor in your improvement, and you need something else. Thinking that, we're really out of date. We really haven't done any improvement in a long time. If we just had this shiny new toy, right, that's best and top of the line kind of software here, we could fix all our problems. And the idea that the system integrator and the team putting in software is going to fix any major problems is just unrealistic. They just don't have the time to stop and say, hey, let's get to the root cause of why you have bad data in your old systems, right? They can try to clean it up along the way, but if you haven't addressed some of those root causes of those issues, you're not going to have a successful implementation, or you're not going to solve those problems with your implementation. But it's just very tempting sometimes to think, let's start this process with a solution selection process, right? Let's start with an RFP instead of really starting with helping each team get to where they are. And then they really have the ability to come to you with a good business case and say, hey,
Right.
here's what we've accomplished, and here's why we can't go any further with what we got. And here's a solution we found when we were exploring the art of the possible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about you mentioned a moment ago, Blackline, sort of a very targeted type of software. It's not trying to be everything in a finance group. It's certainly not trying to be everything within an entire organization outside of finance. But it begs the question of, this is a question from Kyler on LinkedIn. How does this process work translate to new finance tech? What are your thoughts on full ERP systems versus best of breed in finance? So in other words, do we if we're trying to change our finance organization and drive a finance transformation, should we be looking at ERP technologies, or should we be looking at more specific point solutions? Does it just depend? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think it certainly depends on what problem you're trying to solve. You know, when I arrived at my last engagement, I was really expected that you're going to lead the implementation of a new ERP system. And by the way, we've already hired, you know, the project manager and the program manager, and they're working on an RFP and it's ready to go out. And I kind of put the brakes on that because I was trying to get into what are the problems that we have, and what are the solutions going to be. And I found, you know, a new ERP wasn't going to do that for a number of reasons. And the number one was most of our people in the finance team weren't actually working in the general ledger system because they had a sort of industry specific ERP, and then a separate that wasn't really good at general ledger stuff, and a separate general ledger piece, and different items. I think when you look at kind of full ERP and do I get as much of my solution as I can from a single provider, I think that reduces complexity potentially, and you know, reduces the amount of integration points and the changes, and then you have, you know, the trade-off of best in breed on some stuff. I think that when you've done the work I'm talking about, you're much better able to make the decision about why the additional functionality of getting a best in breed solution in a particular area over using the one from the ERP provider is worth that extra effort of integration or coordination. Yeah. Right, you can really understand what data will we have less access to if we have these two pieces, or how much work will we have to do to get those two pieces working together.
And
I don't think there's a single right answer for any organization. I think, you know, kind of you always have to start where you stand, and you know, you're always starting with some amount of already embedded technology, and you know, I think that influences a lot how you go about it.
Yeah, and one of the caveats I'd add to what you said, or just the counterpoints that the industry will often throw at you as a potential software buyer, is if you're talking to ERP vendors about what you just said, about the whole best of breed concept and how maybe it's worth the integration, it's worth the headache of having to tie together multiple systems, that might be worth it if it's driving more business value. But ERP vendors will most likely tell you that's a terrible idea. Not because it is, but because it threatens their model. Right. Their job is to sell you one system that does everything within an organization. If you go best of breed, that is a challenge, or that's a threat to them. So you just have to be aware of that counter messaging that you'll get in the sales cycle in the industry.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen this too, but what I've seen also, sometimes these ERP vendors have acquired another solution in order to address this area of the market that they weren't serving before, and it doesn't integrate any better with their system than
totally. Yeah, I agree. That's a great point. I mean, you look at like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, all those guys have gone out and acquired other solutions, and you're essentially buying a best of breed system. And the only difference is they want you to buy that best of breed system or solution from just them, not other third parties, but really just making sure you have a clear vision of what it is you need. And like you keep saying, Chris, you know, it depends on where the business value is and what you're trying to accomplish, and, you know, let the technology fall into place behind that first and foremost. What about these 10 principles of finance transformations that you have? And I know we probably don't have time to go through all 10 of them in great detail in the interest of time, but maybe you could cover some of the major threads or buckets that are covered in those 10 principles of finance transformations.
Yeah, thanks. So I started out by bucketing them into kind of these 5 areas of the target operating model. So I have 2 principles about people, and 2 about process, 2 about technology, 2 about information, or 2 about data, and 2 about information. And then breaking that, and it kind of worked out that way. I actually, you know, I had the opportunity in the last role to just experiment and try out some things. And honestly, I had 12 principles of finance transformation there, and they weren't so neatly structured, and I kind of arranged them this way. Right. But I like the order in that you're really starting with people, and that first principle is about investing in staff, and it really goes to the idea that the capability of a finance organization really can't be much more than the sum of the capabilities of the people in it. And if you can really start investing in their development and really being willing to say, this is going to be a place where you become more valuable in the marketplace, right? I mean, that's kind of the deal, right? I want to create an environment where you feel like you're learning a lot, and someday you may leave my organization and take what you've learned and bring it somewhere else, and that's okay. But I want to create an environment where we're continually developing and learning, and we have a culture of doing that. Because now I have people that are curious, that are going out self-learning, that are thinking about ways in which they can make their area better. So
Hmm.
that's one of the key ones in people. The second one in people is one that you've talked about and provide services for, which is just change management, really embracing kind of formalized change management. I love the ADKAR model, and really looking at, if I'm going to transform finance, that means I'm turning it into something else. You don't use a term like transformation to describe a small change where
Right.
it's slightly different. It's like we're trying to make the organization something different than it was. So I really have to be thinking about change management. I'm trying to transform the organization by transforming all the people in it. And I need to know where everybody is kind of along that ADKAR model, and where I've lost people, right? If I've lost them back and I know not everybody's familiar with the ADKAR model, but first stage of that is awareness of a compelling reason for change. If I've lost somebody there, then I got to go back and get them from there. And I won't have succeeded in doing a finance transformation if I've left people behind. And
Right.
then on the process side, that's where I get into my kind of lean finance principles and this sort of organization around these process groups. So I create little teams around process groups, and each team is trying to make themselves better with some goals that align to the overall finance goals. So we kind of use this 3 to 5 year objectives, those 5 areas for improvement. But now I need to come up with annual areas of focus for the finance team. And then each little team needs to figure out what that means for them and what they're going to go out and focus on in kind of this sort of annual planning cycle.
Hmm.
And then when I get to technology, I break that down between optimal use of existing technology and implementing new technology. And it's when and how do we implement new technology, and this kind of concept of active sponsorship, which I kind of describe as the opposite of distancing yourself from a potential failure, which I think a lot of executives do sometimes. You put the onus on the system implementer and the people who are going to bring in new technology to make it successful. And as soon as things start going south, you see people, who are the executive sponsors of things, kind of creating a little bit of space between them and the project that's not going that well. I think that really what that active sponsorship means is that you're going in really mining for the potential problems that are going to happen, and plugging those up. But before you get to new technology, you really have to look at optimizing your use of existing technology. Most organizations have some top of the line technology that they are not getting top of the line output
Hmm.
out of. And you really have to also realize that for every technology out there, no matter how good it is, there are organizations that have put it in very well and are using it very well, and there are organizations that haven't. We were putting in a solution called High Radius Cloud Collections in that AR team. And one of the things I talked to the team about was, of all their customers, 25% of them are, would say they're in the top quartile of how well they're using it and how effective it is for them, right?
Hmm.
And 3/4 of the companies aren't, and the ones at the bottom aren't getting a lot of use, and they're thinking maybe I need a different solution, right?
Right. Right.
And there is more difference between the companies that implement high radius really well and those that don't than there is a difference between high radius and its competitors. And so you have to be pretty purposeful of, have I implemented my existing technology really well, or should I be changing it there? And we looked at Blackline, Concur, Excel, Power BI, and said these are all top of the line technology. I mean, Excel is the best spreadsheet solution out there, right? It's not the best EPM out there, right?
Right.
And so we use it as that, but it is the best spreadsheet solution out there. And yet, although everybody on the finance team uses Excel, there is not a single person on the finance team that would be more efficient and more effective if they knew how to use it better than they do, right?
Hmm.
The skill levels among the people all vary, but wherever you are and however you got to where you are, you could improve it. And the barriers to improving your Excel skills are very low. You can go out and watch YouTube videos, right? You can read books, right? But you don't even have to spend money on a book. You certainly don't have to spend money on a course. It's available there for free. It just takes operating an environment where positive change is easy, right? Where I actually have the time to go out and self-learn. I'm not so um, Stephen Covey talked about sharpening the saw, right?
Right.
That's sharpening the saw stuff, right? If you're too busy cutting trees to sharpen the saw, right? You're too busy doing your Excel work to learn how to use it better. Then you're not even making effective use of it. So we really emphasize that principle a lot first, and then by the time you're talking about new technology, you've really kind of addressed all these other areas. On the data side, I kind of focus on both structuring the data well and getting the right dimensions for the data, and thinking about the outcomes we want from it, and how we improve that data structure. And then data stewardship, and really getting people to understand, that data is an asset of the organization. I need to own it. I need to be a good steward of it. If I take a data set and I add bad data to it, I'm really impairing the value of it, right? And somebody needs to be responsible for where that's going. And then the information side is about just taking data and how do you make that useful and insightful. And I focus on two things there. One is driver-based forecasting, which could be a whole nother podcast, so I won't get into it. And the other is just better use of business intelligence tools and data visualization. And that's always kind of low-hanging fruit that really has an impact on the organization, right? Your stakeholders really see it when you start providing dashboards and self-serving or allowing self-service of the information you're providing. So that's my 10.
That's great. And it's super interesting because it seems like those 10 principles of finance transformation are focused on really getting value out of what you've got, organizationally, process-wise, technologically. Of course, there's also the technology piece and thread that could further enable the changes. But you made a really interesting point when you were talking about high radius, about how, and maybe you could restate it because I think it's a really, really good point. The part about how, would you say the bottom quartile versus the top quartile of high radius users, that delta is bigger than any improvement you might get from using
we
something
spend a lot of
high
time
radius.
on sort of system selection, right, and comparing Remilia and high radius and which one can do what, and let me see a demo and let me look at pricing and everything. And yet the pricing of this solution was relatively low for the amount of value that we got, right? And we brought $20 million in. The cost of licensing of either one wasn't very big. Both solutions were similar. But the premise there was that if we can become one of the best companies at putting it in and using it, we will get far more value than if we kind of go along for the ride. We don't know where we're really trying to go.
Or if you go find a better solution, because let's just assume there's a better solution out there, incrementally better than high radius.
A better solution, unless you're really purposeful about making sure you're going to be in the top of the companies that chose it, then I don't think you're going to really realize that incremental benefit of one solution over another. Yeah,
it's a great point. Great way to look at it too. And a lot of what you're saying too with those 10 principles is it almost feels like it's an enabling an organization to get a blueprint in place for what the future state is going to be. And when it does come time to go find and implement a new technology, you've got that blueprint laid out, and you're going to be more purposeful, as you'd say, about finding the right technology, deploying the right technology, not overspending on a bunch of shelfware and stuff that you're not going to use, and making sure you're implementing in a way that adds a lot more business value. So I like the way you've laid that out.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of this transformation, we gained a lot of confidence that if we were to put in, or wherever we put in, because we did put in new technology, but wherever we put it in, we would be, really, we greatly improved our likelihood of being successful at putting that in and realizing it very well, because we were much clearer about what it was we were trying to improve, how it would impact the business, and what the problems were that we had. And one of the things we did there was we had an annual finance transformation summit. At the end of the year, we'd get people together. We had to do it virtually because during COVID. We actually did it in person the first time back in 2019, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that was to kind of talk at a high level of the 3 to 5 year objectives for the organization, right? And then what is it in this calendar year? What is the finance organization really most focused on and what's most important? And then working in those individual teams to come up with how they would connect their own goals to those goals and how they would identify what's most important for them. And we had this principle that came from the 4 disciplines of execution. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a Franklin Covey um, book by Chris McChesney came out. It's really about how to execute on wildly important goals. But there was one piece of that that really stuck with me, which was this idea that people and teams could focus on achieving 1 to 3 goals at once and achieve 1 to 3 goals with excellence. And if they tried to achieve 4 to 7 goals, they tended to achieve 1 or 2 with excellence. And if they tried to achieve more than 7, they tended to achieve 0. And so we really tried to keep people to say, hey, the initiatives coming out of your team at any one point in time should kind of be 1 to 3 of them. We're going to land one plane at a time. But then over the course of a year, you might have more than that, right? Because you don't have to do them all at once. So we do that planning at the end of the year. And then we had this 4-week cycle where every week we had a 45-minute meeting. And a quarter of the teams would report out for about 8 to 10 minutes in that meeting. So each team was reporting out every 4 weeks. The meeting was happening every week, and you heard from a fourth of the teams each week. And what they would report out on was their dashboard of those metrics. Here's what's most important for us to improve. We've got this dashboard showing the change in these metrics over time. So here's how our dashboard's going. We have 3 initiatives right now to act on these key metrics, right? And that we think will be impactful. And here's how they're going. And they'd give a little update on how the initiatives were going. I'd ask, how can I help, right? What obstacles are you finding? What barriers do we get out of the way? And it would be an opportunity for just collaboration and sharing and hearing from each other. It would be an opportunity for celebration of the results and the successes that they were having. It was an opportunity for feedback and suggestion, and an opportunity to ask for that help and support that they needed. And that's where I really feel like you've transformed, right? Everybody in the organization is part of a team that understands what it would mean to be better. Everybody's tracking the metrics that indicate they're better, and everybody has a plan and some initiatives for how they're going to act on it right now. And they've evolved to the point where we've gotten so much efficiency out of our day-to-day from the work we've already done that we're now able to spend 25-40% of our time on these initiatives without hiring any additional people, right? It came from our existing team. Right. So it's not just, existing technology, but it's existing team, existing technology. You really optimize all that first. Now, by the time you go to write a check for somebody to bring in something new, you really know exactly what it is you need to do, right? Because sometimes those 3 initiatives that we're going after, they say, we want to put in high radius, right? We've done the work. We think this is the next step that would be a game changer for us.
And it sounds like one of the maybe secondary but really important benefits of this whole philosophy and approach that you're talking about is that it also creates a sense of ownership within the organization. So in other words, you're not just going to go outsource this transformation to a bunch of consultants and technology vendors. You're actually owning it. You're the one defining what that blueprint looks like and what the business is going to be and how you're going to use technology, if you're going to use technology to drive any of that transformation. Whereas a lot of organizations that don't do the stuff that you just described, they end up being in sort of a helpless mode. That it's a learned helplessness where they need to bring in a system integrator or a consultant to come tell them how to do things because they don't know. Yeah. But what you're advocating is taking ownership. Maybe that may not be the first and foremost intent of it, but it is driving a sense of ownership and accountability within the organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because people are saying, this is my mission. This is what we are working on as a team there. And you can outsource putting in new technology, right? You can hire system integrators and firms and go write that check for that software. What you cannot outsource is a change in your culture to becoming a high performance culture where everybody is interested in learning and improvement. You can't outsource the people development, the leadership of your team. And Yeah, once you really get that, then you've really, one of the lean principles is empowerment, right? You've really empowered the whole organization to understand what would make things better. And now, when you're putting in new technology, it's not something you've decided to do to the people, right?
Right.
We are getting a new ERP, and you are going to be trained on how to use it, and it's going to go live for you and change your world on this date, right? Um, it's more about, hey, we're trying to improve our function, and we've decided this new technology. Now, obviously, there is coordination. You put it on an ERP, it's going to impact a lot of people. It's not an individual team saying that they need it, right? But you should be hearing then from multiple teams saying, hey, it's the ERP that's slowing us down.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a few executives listening right now that maybe
Right.
are a little bit
I
disappointed.
like that.
Yeah, Skylar's comment here on LinkedIn is outsourced leadership equals no leadership, which is a
Right.
great point, very well stated. And I guess it sort of leads to another question here, which is, a lot of executives listening right now might be thinking to themselves like, oh shoot, I was hoping that these guys were going to provide me the answer of how I could just outsource all this, because this all sounds like a pain in the
Yeah.
rear and I don't want to deal with it. But what you're saying is you can't really do that. You have to roll up your sleeves and take ownership of that. But what in general, when you're looking at a finance transformation, what should the CFO's role be in particular, like that senior person within the finance organization? What does that look like? What should their expectations be of what they do and how they contribute and lead a
Yeah.
transformation?
I mean, I think that the first one is alignment of the leaders and managers. You have to make sure everybody's on the same page. I think that that's, often one of the challenges is kind of lack of alignment. HBR ran an article a few years ago, and they were talking about the top problems with digital transformation, actually. But the number one problem was an unspoken disagreement among management about goals, right? And I think that's a pervasive problem. If you're not explicit and you don't do a little work among the senior finance team to get good alignment, then you're going to end up with, a lot of people sort of pulling in different directions, and a lot less progress. And so I think that has to be the role of the CFO, to get his team or her team together and say, um, what is our objective, and why, both in terms of for the finance transformation and then just annually as part of an ongoing cycle. Clarity of objectives, and just, whether it's my 5 areas and how you get better, or something else, or why you're choosing 2 of those over the rest of them, or whatever. But you have to create clarity, and as Patrick Lencioni says, you have to over communicate organizational clarity, right? You don't create clarity by saying it once or putting it on a slide in a slide deck at one point. So I think that's an ongoing role of the CFO, to be over communicating that clarity,
Mm.
really empowering the entire team. And people will not feel empowered unless they really hear repeatedly from the leader that it is their job to improve their job. In fact, one of the obstacles I hear about people, why haven't you changed this before? You see the problem, right? We just mapped it. You came up with the IPO. You see how it could be better. And it's like, my job isn't to change it. My job's not to improve it. It's to do it. The CFO has to allow everybody the room to do that. And part of that is creating an environment where you can make some mistakes. And part of it's, creating an environment where positive change is easy. I think mining for obstacles where support is needed. You have to
Mm.
sometimes ask the question. I see what you're trying to do here, right? In our sort of weekly check-in meetings, I'd say, I see that you're trying to improve this, and you're having some issues with upstream departments, for example. How can I help? Bring me to that meeting. Um, and then really important for the CFO, I think, is being an ambassador for the executive team, the board, other stakeholders, people that might be impacted by a little bit of disruption, right? If I go out there and put in a new accounts receivable system like HighRadius, it's going to automatically send emails to customers. Then there's a host of sort of salespeople and customer relationship owners that need to know about that, need to understand why it's important. And I think the CFO can play a big role there. I had this luxury of being dedicated to sort of finance transformation. The CFO could worry about the board, the CEO, the executive
Mm.
team, all that. I could worry about the internal organization. That's not always possible, and
Yeah.
CFOs aren't always able to spend the time and really get into the detail. Um, but I think that if you can't, then you either need somebody you trust who can do that, and you need to provide those whatever 5 things I said, or you can get even more involved. And if your answer is, look, I'm just too busy for this. Who can I write a check to and do stuff? I would actually start with that problem. Like, how do
Right.
you get yourself to where you can spend more time leading your organization well and less time dealing with the CEO's latest fire alarm?
Yeah, and maybe you rethink what the scope and what the definition of the transformation for your organization is, because it may be that taking on a massive, widespread transformation is not realistic. You maybe don't have the capacity or the internal focus at the moment to deal with that. So you sort of scale back expectations, which isn't the end of the world. I mean, you could do an incremental transformation, even though, to your point, the word transformation suggests that it's a massive jump, but
Yeah.
maybe it's not such a
Any
massive.
one of these process groups, you could do a transformation of that process group with the right, leader helping them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, so just sort of bring this all full circle and maybe summarize here as we come up at the end of our time here. For those that are about to embark on or already in the midst of a finance transformation, and I suppose just a lot of what you're talking about, by the way, that we've been talking about throughout this conversation is we've been focused on finance transformation, but a lot of this is relevant to any sort of digital transformation as well. But what sorts of advice, what are the 2 to 3 things you would leave organizations and team members with for how they should get started? What are the 2 or 3 most important things to keep in mind as you embark on a finance or digital transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes have said start where you stand, right? I said it earlier. You gotta understand kind of where you are and just start moving forward from there. But I really like the Dr. Covey principle of begin with the end in mind. So try to understand where it is you're trying to get to, which is really sustained improvement, right? I'm really trying to create an organization that's just always able to get itself better. I would really think about that. Am I creating an environment where positive change is easy, or is our culture, are our systems, is our hierarchy, is something actually interfering with that? And you won't find that out without really getting in and talking to some of the people about their issues and what's kept them from changing it before. And then really just empowerment. I mean, you want to make a lot of progress, get a lot of people doing the work, right? And if you have good alignment and good clarity, then you can involve a lot of people in it.
Right. Yeah, it's great sound advice. And just a kind of a closing comment here from Peter on LinkedIn. He said, if only more CFOs thought like this guy. So thanks for thinking like this, Chris. And this guy, by the way, is Chris King. He's the founder of Transformative CFO. Tell us about the website. What's the address that people can find you how can people connect with you and learn more about you?
The website is transformativecfo.com. I've got the 10 principles of finance transformation there and some other articles, some information about lean finance. I'm going to be producing more there, and now I'm just starting this consulting practice to kind of be the guide on the side for CFOs and finance teams that want to go through this, and kind of train the trainer and help bring some of these things forward. And look forward to continue doing with that, and be happy to hear from anybody who's looking to get in this fight.
Nice. All right. Well, sounds good. Well, yeah, be sure to follow the website, transformativecfo.com. They can also find you on LinkedIn as well. I know you and I are connected there. So be sure to check that out. And thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time, Chris. That time flew by. There's a lot more we could talk about, but that's a good overview to start. So thanks for being here today.
All right. Thank you, Eric. I had a lot of fun too. And thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. Again, this live stream we host every Tuesday, same time, same place. This episode or this interview, this discussion that you were a part of here today will become edited and wrapped into some other content to become part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is released every Wednesday. It streams to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms. And this episode that features this interview that you're in right now will be released a week from tomorrow, a week from Wednesday. So thank you for being part of the live production. So I want to thank everyone. Have a great week, and we will see you next time on our weekly digital transformation live stream. Have a great week in the meantime, and take care.
Great. Thank you.